This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Protests in the U.S. continue amid reports of police brutality. We have a live report. Tunisia suspends the use of chloroquine in the treatment of COVID-19 patients. The Democratic Republic of Congo confirms a new outbreak of Ebola. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Ntal, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight I'm alongside my colleague Rama Yang, who has our business headlines. Rama.
That's right, Richard. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Nigeria reopens hotels and churches as it moves to the second phase of easing its pandemic restrictions. And we'll have the details of the kind of debt relief that Angola is looking for from the world's 20 largest economies. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Richard.
Thanks a lot, Rama. Once again, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Let's start in the U.S., where protests over the deadly arrest of George Floyd, an unarmed black man in police custody, have entered their seventh day. Arson, looting, and vandalism have rocked major cities, including Los Angeles, New York, and St. Louis. Clashes also continue between police and protesters. Some 40 cities across the country have imposed curfews, including Minneapolis, the center of the nation's protests, and the capital, Washington, D.C. Body cam footage has emerged of two Atlanta police officers using what has been called excessive force in the arrest of two black college students. Messiah Young and Tania Pilgrim were in a car on Saturday amid a George Floyd protest. The videos show an officer breaking the window of the vehicle before a taser is deployed and the occupants of the car are forcefully removed. Atlanta's mayor announced on Sunday 2 officers have been fired after review of the footage, and 3 others have been put on desk duty. All right, for more on this, the U.S. protest, let's cross over to Washington, D.C., where our reporter Owen Fairclough is live. Owen, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. I know you've got a lot going on. I know your hands are full. But first things first, what is the latest update on the protest, and are there any signs of the demonstrations abating? Owen.
Not so far, Richard. You can probably hear behind me protesters extremely vocal already, and it's only midday here in Washington, D.C. I'm just going to step aside and let Kuba, our cameraman, show you the scene here. We're right in front of the White House. You can probably see it there. A reasonably sized crowd, but very vocal. And I have to tell you, in the hour or so that we've been down here, the mood was rather different when we arrived. Perhaps because President Donald Trump changed the tone somewhat with that incredible and stunning piece of choreography that will surely resonate through history when he left the White House after that address on Monday evening, where crowds were tear gassed to clear the way for the US president to come to this church that was attacked during that unrest, and he stood in this very spot holding a Bible. He's been extending that religious theme somewhat this Tuesday after traveling to the John Paul II shrine a few kilometers away from the downtown. All of that as part of international religious freedom. As well, continue that theme about law and order. He's promised to use force. He's threatening to deploy the military onto the streets across the United States if governors and states, he says, cannot contain and cannot stop these protests. Trump tweeted a little earlier this Tuesday, call out the National Guard in New York. He thinks that New York hasn't done enough. It imposed a curfew on Monday starting at 11 p.m. The president thinks that curfew should have been much earlier. So that's the backdrop to this. You mentioned as well more examples of people being injured, shot as well during these protests, both police officers and protests in these demonstrations that continued through Monday night here in the United States. Richard.
All right, Owen, thank you for walking us through and for those very important points that you brought out there. That brings me to my next question, Owen. There are reports of use of force by police officers, including claims that they use tasers on students. Is there any indication that police will be held accountable for this and other reported cases of brutality against the protesters? Owen?
Clearly that has to be a priority, doesn't it? And we've obviously seen in Minneapolis, for example, those officers allegedly involved in the murder of George Floyd fired immediately. And of course, one of those officers involved now being charged with murder. But there's clearly a wider debate here about police reform. It's something that former President Barack Obama and Joe Biden, who will be Trump's opponent in this November's presidential elections, both talking about. Particularly Biden says he wants to put this back on the agenda, although critics of both of those men have said they had 8 years in the White House to try and undertake some kind of reform and didn't really do that. And of course, this use of a neck restraint, kneeling on the neck, we know that has been banned by many police forces in the United States. So there is this discussion to be had about excessive police force that continues to result in the deaths during arrest of African Americans. But it would seem as well President Donald Trump, the US president, seems more concerned with a much more forceful response, despite condemning the death of George Floyd on at least 2 occasions over the last few days. President Trump seems to be much more focused on how the police and potentially soldiers can end these demonstrations, end this violent unrest, much less on reform of the institutions involved.
All right, Owen, speaking of Donald Trump doesn't seem to be making any friends these days. As you've mentioned, Donald Trump has threatened to use the military to curb the protests. Tell us more about this and how Americans are reacting to the president's remarks. Owen?
Absolutely, and we mentioned a moment ago, Richard, how the president has really changed the tone of this with that address in the Rose Garden of the White House behind me on Monday evening, threatening to put troops on the streets of the United States. This is an extremely touchy subject in the United States. The concept of using troops to enforce domestic laws is something that Americans simply do not like, although it has happened through history. And in fact, here in Washington, D.C., during the riots and the aftermath of the assassination of Martin Luther King, another deeply troubling episode in America's very difficult racial history, troops were deployed on the streets of Washington, D.C. and across the United States. Now, Trump is threatening to use the Insurrection Act essentially to do this, and many constitutional experts and scholars are saying he probably has the authority to do that because he can invoke this law under a very narrow definition, potentially using military police to enforce and to try and stop this unrest. But there are others who say that this is a dangerous example of presidential overreach, and this is partly why you're seeing on social media hashtags such as martial law and Trump dictatorship trending right now. They're extremely concerned about the US president overreaching, and this is partly why the Constitution here in the United States and Congress were set up to stop US presidents effectively trying to raise their own private armies. Richard.
All right, Owen Fairclough, thank you for that update and report. Excellent reporting. Please stay safe. All right, staying in the United States, 2 competing reports disagree on what caused the death of George Floyd. An autopsy by the medical examiner's office shows he died of a cardiopulmonary arrest, but an independent autopsy initiated by Floyd's family shows he died of asphyxiation or suffocation. Floyd's family is calling for first-degree murder charges against the officer who killed him. Dan Williams has more.
George Floyd's brother Terrence wanted to see for himself the location where his brother was killed. But as he approached the makeshift memorial, his legs appeared to give way, overcome with emotion. An outline of George's body has been painted on the ground. Terrence sat down beside it, sobbing. Despite the anguish and the heartbreak, Floyd's message was one of unity, calling for peaceful protests, but also for his brother's killers to be brought to justice.
So if I'm not over here wilding out, if I'm not over here blowing up stuff, if I'm not over here messing up my community, then what are y'all doing? What are y'all doing? Y'all doing nothing, because that's not going to bring my brother back at all. I know he would not want y'all to be doing this. Peace on the left. Peace on the left. Peace on the left. Peace on the left. Justice on the right.
Terence then spent several minutes looking at the messages and flowers that have been left at this intersection in Minneapolis.
The events here of a week ago served to shake a nation, sparks that ignited countrywide outrage, while this makeshift memorial to George Floyd has become a sacred space and a powerful reminder as to the horror that occurred.
I can't breathe. I can't move. I've been waiting the whole time.
The images of former police officer Derek Chauvin kneeling on Floyd's neck for several minutes caused outrage across the U.S.
I think we all share the same sentiment. We want our city back, and we want justice for George Floyd, and that is at the top of our list of things. And a lot of us are willing to risk our lives to make that happen. But in a peaceful way is the way to do it.
We need a new law passed. We want justice. We want the police to obviously pay for their sins for what they committed, this monstrosity over here.
Few could have predicted the chain of events that have taken place in the U.S. since George Floyd's death here. It has exposed deep sadness and anger, but even deeper social issues. Dan Williams, CGTN, Minneapolis.
Let's turn our attention to Kenya, where a group of protesters gathered outside the United States Embassy in Nairobi on Tuesday. It was a show of global solidarity with those happening in the United States and other parts of the world over the killing of George Floyd.
Down with police brutality now! Down with police brutality now! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter!
The protesters carried placards calling for justice for the African American man. The protest was, however, quickly dispersed by the police. Let's now take a look at the latest updates on the coronavirus pandemic. China is continuing with its assistance to African countries to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Chinese specialists in COVID-19 held their first meeting on Monday with Sudanese health officials in the country's capital, Khartoum. After completing their mission to Algeria, the Chinese team traveled to Sudan, one of the continent's hardest hit nations. CGTN's Hei Weiwei has more.
The meeting between Chinese doctors and Sudanese health officials lasted around 2 hours. Sudan reported the first case of COVID-19 in March. Now, with over 5,000 cases, the country has the highest number of the confirmed cases and deaths in East Africa.
We've been facing some challenges because of a new kind of an outbreak. We're moving now into expanding our testing strategy and also look into the impact of the mitigation strategies that we have been through.
Chinese government dispatched 20 medical experts to help Sudan fight against COVID-19 this time. We'll continue to provide more medical supplies to Sudan.
Our experts include respiratory, ICU, infection prevention and control, cardiology.
A Q&A session with the two sides focused on more specific issues.
So how the arrangement of this suspect case, waiting in the health facility or waiting at home, or are there any policy for that?
Considering the capacity of the response teams, considering the capacity of the beds, diagnostic capacities, most of our patients are being managed at home.
The team also met with members of the Supreme Committee for Health Emergencies, a national cross-department body responsible for COVID-19 in Sudan. In the coming days, the Chinese experts will visit frontline medical personnel in Sudanese hospitals. He Weiwei, CGTN, Khartoum.
Tunisia has suspended the use of chloroquine in the treatment of COVID-19 patients. Tunisian authorities say they are also ramping up coronavirus testing.
Tunisian health authorities have justified the decision to suspend the use of hydroxychloroquine by the drop in the number of patients. In fact, only one patient was hospitalized out of a total of 72 active cases under surveillance at the start of June.
Tunisia has just one patient at the hospital. We have approached the hydroxychloroquine issue in an objective way. It was first used in the world because the virus appeared suddenly and we were not prepared. We hoped that the chloroquine would stop the development of the cells and to help the immune system to protect the lungs and the body in general, but the results were not very satisfactory.
Dr. Gergah added that the World Health Organization announced the pausing of clinical trials with hydroxychloroquine, which it is conducting with its partners in several countries as a precautionary measure.
The decision was taken following the publication of a study on May 2nd in the Lancet Medical Journal, deeming ineffective, even harmful, the use of chloroquine or its derivatives such as hydroxychloroquine against COVID-19. The study was made following tests on 96,000 patients in 671 hospitals around the world.
The Ministry of Health announced that 400,000 rapid tests will be carried out on the medical and paramedical staff and thousands of security guards, the military, as well as policemen.
Tunisia has survived the pandemic because the national strategy and the prevention measures were right from the beginning. Now large-scale testing aims to further control the disease, prevent its spread and to isolate any cluster of infections with coronavirus.
Experts at the National Observatory of New and Emerging Diseases will conduct surveys after the rapid tests have been carried out in order to assess the overall epidemiological situation in Tunisia.
The COVID-19 task force has announced that the detection of some imported cases of coronavirus infection does not preclude declaring the end of the pandemic in Tunisia if there is no domestic contamination in 40 days. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Scientists have been trying to predict Egypt's coronavirus infection trends along with worst-case scenarios. Egypt's cases are currently at 26,000, but one group forecasts that the country could reach the 40,000 mark by next week. Here's Adel Al-Mahroui with more.
The COVID-19 pandemic has cast a shadow over future planning. In efforts to assist the government with more precise projections, a group of Egyptian scientists have been analyzing COVID-19 data. They've been compiling satellite imaging and health ministry data to predict epidemiological trends in Egypt.
We are using dynamic algorithms which have the capacity to change projections based on the change in the actual data. We studied real data from 10 days ago and we built from it an assumptive reality in the future for the following 10 days. But we cannot make forecasts for the next 1 or 2 months to come.
Using remote sensing capabilities, we tracked the nitrogen dioxide emission which results from human activity and traffic, thus to find a relation between crowding and the increase in new COVID-19 infections. That helps us to answer one crucial question: how effective are the preventive measures the government enforces?
The data gathered is used to produce 4 different COVID-19 infection simulations. Egypt's Minister of Higher Education says their study assumes that the actual infection figures are 5 times the official numbers.
We want to know what is the maximum possible infection. The flattening in this curve tells us that all future scenarios are still possible. 100,000 cases is possible. The million figure is possible. Even the 5 million and so on. Our models are trying to confirm that range. What we are sure of is that we will reach 50,000 cases. It's impossible to disregard that figure.
This is just one project among the COVID-19 research Egypt is undertaking. Authorities say the country has so far produced 50 studies concerning the pandemic, while the entire continent has registered 64. Projections released at the start of the month suggest that Egypt will reach the 40,000 case mark around June 10th. The data also indicate that every 10 cases in Egypt infect 14 others, which put the nation at the upward trend phase. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, a lot of COVID-19 questions were answered at the recent international webinar on global science and technology development and governance under the COVID-19 epidemic. CGTN's reporter Wang Hui sat down with the director of the Global Public Health Center of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention. He talked about China's progress and challenges in reaching a vaccine for COVID-19 and more. Let's take a look.
About the vaccine for COVID-19, what Chinese companies and organizations are working on it, and what progress have they made?
And there are 4 to 5 Chinese different companies got the permission to do the clinical trial. For example, and Professor Dr. Chen Wei, she is an academician of Chinese Academy of Engineering, and her teams announced the first COVID-19 vaccine candidate worldwide, and they finished the phase 1, and now they announced that they will finish the clinical trial phase 2 in the middle of June. And some other company, they have different R&D strategy. And for example, Dr. Chen Wei's teams used adenovirus as a vaccine vector to have a new types or new forms of vaccine. And other company announced that they have inductive vaccine, that is classical vaccine. All of them now in the stage of clinical phase 2 or phase 1 plus phase 2.
Well, when do you think China will have its vaccine?
According to the R&D of vaccine, we need to finish at least phase 3 for clinical trial. After we release, can be used for routine peoples.
When do you think they can finish their phase 3?
Usually phase 3 need more cases. It's more volunteers. Well, the amount of volunteer depends on the epidemic situation. For example, if the epidemic is still very severe, that means in one region or in one country they have more cases, perhaps they will conduct a phase 3 clinical trial very easily. But now in China, COVID-19 epidemic is almost under control. We have only 1 digital case reported every day.
So you think international cooperation could be a good way to resolve this problem?
It should be a good way. It is a good way. Through the international cooperation, perhaps coordinated by some international organization, for example, WHO, would be the good way to solve such kind of problem.
Well, which country is China going to work with?
I don't know exactly, but I think through the international cooperation, whatever bilateral or multiple lateral, we can arrange it.
You're watching Africa Live on CGTN. A lot more news coming your way. Here's a look at what's ahead. Armed bandits kill at least 18 people in the northern region of Nigeria. And Kenya's street vendors hit hard by the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for tuning in. Let's turn our attention to Nigeria, where the northwestern state of Katsina, security forces are pursuing armed bandits following a raid over the weekend. The bandits killed at least 18 people, including a local official, and stole thousands of livestock. Witness said they killed the local leader, Abdul Hamid Sani, after attempting to kidnap him. They also said as many as 500 men on motorcycles headed with the stolen livestock towards other villages. Thousands of residents have fled their homes. Criminal gangs carrying out robberies and kidnappings are responsible for hundreds of deaths in northwest Nigeria. The attacks have added to security challenges in a country already struggling to contain Islamist insurgencies. Health officials in the Democratic Republic of Congo have confirmed the death of 5 people from a new Ebola outbreak. The deaths in the northwest of the country occurred between the 18th and 30th of May. Results were confirmed on Monday. This outbreak in Equateur province was detected as another one in the east of the country, and it's nearing its end. CGTN's Christopher Naringa has more in this report.
Mbandaka City in northwestern DRC has been hit with a fresh Ebola outbreak. 6 people with the virus were identified in Wangata Health Zone, 5 of whom have already died. The government has called for calm as it begins efforts to contain the new outbreak.
Our country is preparing to battle against a new Ebola outbreak that has been detected in Equateur province. This is the 11th outbreak in our country. It has come at a time when we are struggling to contain 3 other epidemics. But we will take all the necessary measures to end it.
Les 3 dernières épidémies se sont succédées sans intervalle de plus d'1 mois.
The new cases in Mbandaka have been detected as the country's 10th Ebola outbreak in eastern DRC was nearing its end. Authorities had gone for 33 days without recording a new case in Beni City, the epicenter of the outbreak. The DRC is also battling the world's worst measles outbreak and the COVID-19 pandemic.
We have seen people dying of the coronavirus here in a very short time, and now a new Ebola outbreak has been reported in the northwest of our country. It is a very sad situation. Our president should do everything possible to end that disease.
Our government and health experts should put in a lot of effort to contain the Ebola outbreak and the COVID-19 pandemic, especially the new Ebola outbreak in Equateur province.
The World Health Organization and other aid agencies have sent health teams to Mbandaka City to support the government to stop the spread of the disease. According to health experts, new Ebola outbreaks are expected in the DRC, given the presence of the virus in animals in many parts of the country.
Mbandaka City is where the DRC's 9th Ebola outbreak occurred in May 2018. The disease claimed 33 lives, but it was brought to an end after 3 months. The new outbreak is a big setback to officials here who've been struggling to end the outbreak in eastern DRC that has claimed more than 2,200 lives since August 2018. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Amid the coronavirus pandemic, street vendors have been hit hard, and the economic impact has been strongly felt in Kibera, an informal settlement in Kenya where many residents make a living selling goods on the streets. Kibera's young journalist from Shine Kibera TV reported the story for CGTN. Let's take a look.
Amid the coronavirus pandemic, street vendors have been hit hard. And the harsh effects have been strongly felt in Kibera, an informal settlement in Kenya where many of the residents make their living selling goods on the side of the street. Kibera's young journalists from Shine Kibera TV reported on the story for CGTN. Take a look.
Kibera is the biggest slum in Africa.
A drive-through will give you a picture that life is normal. But don't be deceived. The COVID-19 has changed people's lives very fast. Among those hit are the food vendors on the streets.
Customers hawako, watu sahi sasa wako kwa nyumba, sasa na hawakuwa wamepata pesa, sasa haisongi. Kama ulikuwa unapika mifuko ine, umerudi chini kwa 1.5.
We meet another man who sells fresh juice at 42. For about an hour, I couldn't see a single shopper enter his shop.
Vile maisha ilikuwa kabla ya corona, watu walikuwa na pesa, walikuwa nauza vizuri. Saa hii maisha vile imekuwa ngumu, unapata uuzaji iko chini. Saa hii unapata mtu anashughulika tu na chakula, mahitaji ya nyumba, lakini ukipata kama ni mahitaji mengine inamlemea. So nafikiria inafaa kuwe na mkono kama wa serikali hivi ama masilika siwe zinasaidia pande nyingine.
Moses counts himself lucky whenever he sees a customer. And now as you can see, you just have to sit and wait.
Tunjikinge, ile kitu mtu ako naye kidogo anjaribu kuitumia kwa njia inayostahili, ndio tunjui hii corona itachukua muda gani.
A few yards from Moses' shop, I meet Joshua who sells grocery just by the roadside, and he shares the same experience.
Vile tunauza kiwango chini sana. Na ile kitu tunaweza kuomba hii ugonjwa iishe kwa sababu imetufungia kila kitu.
He is lucky to get a few customers, perhaps because it's approaching lunchtime. His area of concern is the curfew.
Ile masaa watu walikuwa wanakuja kununua vitu, hiyo masaa ndio tunafunga naye.
Such are the challenges local business owners go through in Kibra. I am Sylvia Adhiambo.
The news continues on Africa Live. Time now for our business headlines with Raman Yang.
Thank you very much, Richard. Here's what's coming up in business. Nigeria reopens hotels and churches as it moves to the second phase of easing its pandemic restrictions. And Africa's second largest oil producer is looking for debt relief from the G20. We'll have the details next.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. See, business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's start in Nigeria. Authorities over there have reopened hotels and places of worship, from the 2nd of June as the country moves into the second phase of easing the restrictions designed to limit the spread of COVID-19. Africa's most populous country has recorded more than 10,000 confirmed cases and roughly 300 deaths in this pandemic. The chairman of the presidential task force that is dealing with this pandemic says a national curfew would also be shortened by 4 hours. It will now run from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. Banks and other financial institutions will be allowed to open fully and domestic flights will resume from the 21st of June. But other restrictions do remain in place, like a ban on travel between states, with exceptions for essential workers. Africa's second largest oil producer has formally asked for debt relief from the G20. Angola's finance ministry is also in advanced talks, it says, with some of the countries which import its oil to reprofile the loans that have been extended to it. Now, reprofiling is generally the extension of the period to repay a loan without actually changing the principal sum due. In consultation with the IMF, Angola's finance ministry is also negotiating a debt service standstill on official government-to-government loans. Angola relies heavily on oil revenues to fund government operations. It has been struggling, however, to cope with a collapse in oil prices, which saw crude futures plunge below $20 a barrel in the month of April, and they also turned negative on one specific contract in that month in the United States. On to North Africa, where Egypt's government is using the time and the space created by the pandemic restrictions to rehabilitate parts of the country's infrastructure. Between a daily curfew on one hand and a partial lockdown imposed on public activities on the other, streets tend to be empty for fairly long stretches of time. That in turn has allowed the authorities in Cairo to speed up infrastructure projects. As Adel El Marouki now reports, most of the street paving and the bridge rehabilitation projects have been wrapped up in record time.
While the coronavirus pandemic has greatly slowed down the Egyptian economy, the government's National Roads project is building up speed. The partial lockdown imposed to curb the spread of the virus has forced millions to stay at home and thereby lifting traffic off the streets. It's a great opportunity for the government to complete paving roads and maintenance needed to repair bridges.
Previously, Egypt used to spend millions to erect roads, then leave most of them unmaintained. Today, with each new road built, a maintenance plan is set to ensure its long-term service to the public. Nearly 25 bridges in Egypt are completely unsafe for vehicles because they never got the required maintenance. Work now to repair them is on full throttle.
The National Roads project is adding more than 7,000 kilometers of highway to Egypt's new residential and industrial cities. It includes some 40 bridges and at least 5 tunnels to connect the Sinai Peninsula with the Egyptian mainland. With it, the government is hoping to put an end to Egypt's $1.8 billion of losses due to a horrific number of deadly accidents every year.
We used to suffer a lot, not only from financial losses but also in lives, because of the collapsing roads infrastructure. Deadly accidents used to take place almost daily due to lack of safety measures. All new roads are now being built based on global safety requirements, which will make movement faster and safer.
The National Roads project began in 2014 and will extend until 2030. Egypt is allocating more than $1 billion for the project. With the progress made so far, Cairo's statistical body says it registered a 41% drop in roads accidents. The Egyptian Prime Ministry says the project has also pushed Egypt 90 positions upwards globally in terms of roads quality.
The government is now investing more in the quality of roads built. That will help save money on the long run. There are a lot of important roads getting built inside major cities at tremendous speed. That must be followed with tight supervision over vehicle loads because violations used to be common, which was the reason of deteriorating roads in the past.
Development in Egyptian cities is considered a vital step for the National Roads project. It aims to widen streets to speed up vehicle movement to connect it faster with the newly built highways. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
We're still in North Africa. Legislators in Tunisia have approved a $74.5 million loan facility that's designed to support startups and SMEs in the North African state. They also approved a $100 million loan agreement to fund a national e-governance program, as CGTN's Adan Chouachi now explains.
The first loan agreement signed between the Republic of Tunisia and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development aims to help Tunisia achieve the objectives of a 5-year program for the creation of 1,000 startups and consequently the creation of 10,000 jobs.
The first objective of this loan is to support the state budget. Tunisia lacks financial resources to implement its structural, economic and social reforms. The current pandemic has caused the loss of tens of thousands of jobs. Now, the state must find ways of creating jobs by seeking foreign loans.
The Parliament has also adopted an €89.2 million loan agreement to finance an e-governance program and strengthen the digitization of administrative services.
The
COVID-19 crisis has revealed the weaknesses of the services offered by the Tunisian administration. Many services will be digitized. The new loan will help state agencies and ministries guarantee the efficiency of operations. We cannot talk about a digital economy while the administration is disconnected from reality and technology.
The project will connect 2,000 primary schools to the internet via optical fiber, improve the education sector, and reorganize exams and digital content.
Connecting schools to the internet will allow students to sit for online exams and avoid direct contact because the second wave of the pandemic is expected at the beginning of the new school year.
The new loans aim to improve social services by identifying the special categories concerned by social interventions, to generate the digital transfers of funds, and to improve the use of e-healthcare solutions.
Tunisia is taking significant steps towards using e-governance, online platforms, and mobile technology for transparency. Experts assert that embracing digitization will help in the fight against corruption. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Back into West Africa, cocoa farmers in Cote d'Ivoire, the largest producer of that commodity, are expecting a boost in the last stage of the April to September crop. Now, this comes in the wake of above-average rainfall in most of the country's cocoa-growing regions. Reuters is reporting that rainfall in one such area, Sub, is about 17 millimeters. That's 20 millimeters above the 5-year average. Rainfall in Dalo is above the 5-year average by a similar margin. Now, farmers do remain hopeful that these rains will continue until late July. If that happens, it would certainly encourage the next main crop to start a little earlier. And over in East Africa, a recycling plant in Tanzania's port city of Dar es Salaam has traded its usual focus on paper waste for focus on plastic instead. It's now turning garbage into much-needed face shields, which are being used in hospitals and health centres countrywide. CGTN's Jane Keo has the details.
Did you know that enough plastic bottles are tossed each year to circle the planet 4 times? A company in Dar es Salaam has been collecting and recycling these for local and international markets, but the operations have not been spared by the coronavirus pandemic.
We were supposed to export some of the material very earlier, maybe February or March, but we couldn't do that just due to the lockdown. Like our customer in India, India was in lockdown.
Before the pandemic, Zaidi recyclers would make a profit of an estimated $40,000 a month from the collection and processing of paper waste. But unlike most businesses, the company has managed to keep all its 38 employees thanks to the manufacture of these plastic face shields.
So far, we are capable of making more than 1,000 units in a day. And so far, we have made more than 6,000 units. Actually, we have made and distributed more than 6,000 units, which is equivalent to 10,000 USD sales in just a space of one month. We have encountered extra cost, whereby some of the critical employees, we have provided them with extra transport so that they would not, come into contact with, many people, so that at least the operations, will go on smoothly.
Zaidi Recyclers has partnered with Tanzania's Recycling Association to make the face shields that are sold for about $2 each.
The first procedure is to cut the plastic bottles, the bottom part and the upper part. Make sure that you size it into very equal and not sharpen to disturb your face once you put it on. And the second step is to bind the rubber together with the elastic band After that, you have to make sure that the elastic bands and the rubber are in a quiet positions, not to move or to later on strip off.
Tanzania's President John Magufuli recently announced plans to reopen universities and allow the resumption of sports and international flights if the decline in new coronavirus infections continues. Unlike most other African countries, the government has gone for days without publicly releasing the COVID-19 updates. According to WHO, Tanzania has 509 confirmed cases, 21 deaths. Jill Keo, CGTN.
I'll be there for now, but here's what's coming up at the top of the hour. Egypt has imposed price controls on the treatment of COVID-19 patients in ICUs at private hospitals. We'll explore the complaints around inflated prices and what exactly is being done about it at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Richard.
Thanks a lot, Rama. You are watching Africa Live on CGT, and we've got a lot more amazing and inspiring stories coming your way. Here's a look at what's ahead. Electric motorcycles make life easier for rural women in Zimbabwe.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Africa Live. In the rural Zimbabwe district of Wedza, a project aimed at leasing electric motorcycles to local communities has been launched. The program is helping bring income to poor women and easing the burden of looking after their families. CGTN's Daniela Pearson looks at how their lives are now improving as a result.
The three-wheeler, known as Hamba, is leased to women in Zimbabwe in groups of up to 5. They can now carry farm produce to distant markets, offer transport services to villagers, and use the motorcycle for domestic chores.
Women in the rural areas carry the burden of carrying firewood, going to fetch water to drink, and carrying school kids to the school. So as Mobility for Africa, we saw that we need to lessen the burden on women. So we needed to test with the women so that we can see if they can be able to do some productive work during the time by saving time and saving their income.
We used to carry firewood on our heads for very long distances of 2 kilometers. But now it's much easier as this tricycle has taken away that burden.
Users pay an equivalent of $15 a month to lease the Hamba as a group. It has a maximum range of 100 kilometers and costs about $1 to change the batteries charged at a solar-powered station.
The project is targeted to rural women and many other service providers. So we have noticed that it's not everyone who can afford to buy it. So we are going to sell it to those who can afford to buy it, but at the same time we will continue leasing, because those rural women, what should their future look like if we just take our Hambas and then start selling them?
Health workers in the area say many women give birth at home, while others walk 12 kilometers to the nearest clinic. Pamhidzi Mutunya ferries an average of 4 people a day and collects medication for patients.
This Hamba motorcycle has made it easier for me to ferry patients to and from the hospital. We now have fewer cases of pregnant women giving birth at home due to lack of transport to the clinic, as was the case before.
Mobility for Africa is in the second phase of the pilot project before it can go commercial. The Hamba is assembled in Harare with kits made in China. Once it starts selling, it will go for $1,500 per bike. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
And we're not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Don't go away. Here's what's ahead. South Africa mulls options for resumption of the Football League.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Sport on Africa Live. Let's turn our attention to motorsport, where Austria's Red Bull Ring and Britain's Silverstone Circuit will each host 2 Grand Prix races without spectators on an initial 8-race Formula One calendar published on Tuesday. Austria's races start the season on July the 5th and 12th. Silverstone will host the British Grand Prix on August